Once upon a time, on one of the coldest and darkest nights of winter, a lonely farmer named Henry was resting in his isolated village. The night had long fallen, and the sky had covered the village like a black veil. The wind howled, shaking the windows, and the snowstorm raged outside. Henry had gone to bed a few hours ago, but his sleep was light. Strange noises coming from his barn woke him in the middle of the night. At first, he thought the noises were caused by the wind, but the unusual lowing of his cows and the panicked neighing of his horse sent a chill down his spine. Henry sat up in his bed, hesitating for a moment. The uneasiness within him quickly grew into a deep concern. The noises piercing the silence and the frantic sounds of his animals indicated that something was wrong. Finally, he snapped out of it, jumping out of bed. He hastily threw his thick wool coat over his shoulders, his trembling hands searching for his flashlight. He had no choice but to go to the barn. Something might have happened to his animals. As he stepped outside, he realized that the snow had piled up higher than he expected. It reached his knees, and every step felt heavier than the last. His breath turned into mist in the freezing air, and his bare hands quickly grew cold. As he approached the barn, the unsettling feeling inside him only intensified. The howling wind mixed with the strange noises from the barn, creating a sense of unknown dread in the dark night. When he reached the barn door, he paused, taking a deep breath. He had no idea what awaited him behind the door. Slowly, he cracked it open and stepped inside. But as soon as he took his first step, an icy gust of wind hit his face. The air inside the barn was even colder than outside. He immediately turned on his flashlight, shining the beam into the barn. At that moment, his eyes widened in shock. In the middle of the barn, near his animals, he saw strange, shadowy figures moving. He rubbed his eyes, hoping it was just a trick of the light, but the shadows were still there, and they were far from still. His horse was rearing up, and the cows were frantically running in all directions. In that moment, Henry's entire body froze. It was as if an invisible hand had paralyzed him. He couldn't move or even scream. A deep sense of fear engulfed him. Whatever these figures were, they certainly weren't human. These shadows, accompanied by strange whispers, continued to circle the barn, and Henry's eyes slowly began to focus on them more clearly. The shadows were formless, but he could sense a cold aura radiating from each one. Henry watched in terror as the beings approached his horse. A horrible thought flashed in his mind. They were going to take his horse. But to his surprise, they didn't. Instead of taking the horse away, they started moving in circles around it. Henry's ears caught onto the eerie whispers. They were speaking in a language he couldn't understand, filled with strange, melodic tones. As the whispers grew louder, the atmosphere in the barn became even heavier and more oppressive. At one point, he noticed his horse nervously stomping its feet. Henry, on the verge of fainting, watched as his eyes filled with tears. Fear had overtaken his entire body. The whispers, as if echoing from the barn's walls, grew louder, overwhelming Henry's mind. After what felt like an eternity, the shadowy figures slowly dissipated. There was no light to follow them. They simply vanished into the darkness. The barn returned to its previous silence, but Henry was still unable to move. The invisible weight pressing down on his body gradually lifted, and Henry collapsed to his knees. He looked around the barn with fear-filled eyes, realizing that the strange creatures had left behind an unsettling cold. His mind was racing. There was no logical explanation for what he had just witnessed. When morning came, Henry gathered all his courage and returned to the barn. The terror of the night still haunted his mind, but he had to check on his horse. As he stepped inside, the sight before him made his heart pound even faster. His horse had returned, but this time it was adorned with bright fabrics, colorful beads, and strange feathers. Henry couldn't believe his eyes. These decorations were unlike anything a human could create. They were so intricate, so detailed, that it was clear they were not of this world. The ornaments seemed to glow as if they were playing with the light. Henry had no idea where they came from or what they meant, but one thing was certain. The events of that night were supernatural. Henry's mind recalled an old legend told in the village for generations. It was said that on certain dark nights, these beings would descend upon the earth and hold a wedding ceremony once a year. They would steal a horse from the human world, adorn it, and use it as a bridal carriage. Henry's horse had been chosen for their wedding. They had taken his horse during the night, decorated it, and returned it by dawn. After that night, Henry never approached the barn at night again. The fear he had experienced that night was forever etched into his memory. The strange ornaments on his horse never faded. They always gleamed brightly. Every time Henry saw his horse, he was reminded that it had witnessed a supernatural wedding, and the thought robbed him of his peace for many nights to come.
Which story did you find the scariest? Let us know in the comments which story you liked the most and share your own scary experiences. Maybe we'll feature your story in one of our upcoming videos.